The crosswalk. Sterling Harcourt didn't do traffic. Not because he couldn't sit in a car like any other man, but because a vampire king did not wait.
Yes.
The city usually moved around him the way water moved around stone. Lights turned green at the right moment. Doors opened before he reached them. People stepped aside without knowing why. That's how influence worked when you were older than most nations and your name was stitched into the unseen treaties that kept monsters from turning the world into a feast. Yet here he was, trapped in the back seat of his black Mercedes at a red light on Fifth Avenue, listening to his fiancée discuss wedding venues as if a wedding was a lever that could pull destiny into place. Courtney sat beside him with her posture perfect and her voice polished. She wore a tailored black coat that looked like it had never known a wrinkle and gloves the color of spilled ink. Her phone glowed between her fingers as she scrolled through galleries of ballrooms and floral arrangements, each image colder than the last. "The Winter Hall photographs better in December," she said, bright and certain. "Snow outside. Crystal chandeliers. It sends the right message to the council." Sterling gave the practiced nod of a king who had mastered the art of appearing present while keeping his heart behind a locked door. It was the same skill that had kept him alive through centuries of betrayal. The same restraint his father had beaten into him as a lesson. Duty first, emotion last. Courtney liked that about him. She did not ask him to feel. She asked him to perform. "The floral budget alone will be..." Courtney paused mid-sentence and her tone sharpened slightly. "Sterling, are you listening?" He could have answered. He had 1,000 smooth answers ready at all times. But the world outside the tinted window shifted, and for the first time in decades Sterling forgot how to pretend. A woman stepped off the curb into the crosswalk. Long brown hair, not glossy and styled like Courtney's but loose and wind-tossed, catching gray daylight like a ribbon. A charcoal cardigan wrapped around her body, thin in winter, the fabric stretched at the elbows. She moved with a careful determination, chin lifted, shoulders set, as if she'd been forced to become brave simply to survive being tired. And strapped to her front, 2 babies. 2 tiny faces nestled against her chest in a double carrier, bundled in soft hats with little ears on top. One of them yawned, mouth opening in a silent O. The other blinked slowly, lashes thick and dark. Sterling's breath stopped, not because he needed oxygen, but because every instinct in his body slammed into a wall and shattered. He knew that walk. He knew the stubborn angle of her shoulders, the way she moved like she didn't expect help from anyone. He knew the shape of her mouth even from behind glass. Emerson. The name hit him like a blade. Emerson Becker. His former human lover, his secret, his mistake, his mercy. The woman he had left 13 months ago because he had convinced himself love was not something a king was allowed to keep. The light stayed red. The driver's hands tightened on the wheel, glancing in the rearview mirror as if uncertain whether to move at Sterling's command. Sterling didn't speak. He couldn't. He watched as Emerson crossed the street with the twins pressed close to her heart, her arms curved protectively around them as she navigated the cold and the crowd. Her face looked thinner than he remembered. There were shadows beneath her eyes. A bruise-colored exhaustion sat in the slope of her posture like a second coat. Then the baby who had yawned lifted his head, just enough. And Sterling saw the eyes. Silver blue. His eyes. Hardcore eyes. For a single, suspended second, the world narrowed to that impossible detail. The city noise vanished. Courtney's voice became a distant echo. Even the hum of the engine felt far away. Time, usually Sterling's obedient servant, refused to move. The baby blinked, calm and unafraid. A tiny hand flexed against Emerson's sweater. Emerson didn't look up. She never looked toward Sterling's car. Not once. She crossed like she had crossed 1,000 times before, like the world had taught her she could not rely on anyone and she had listened. Sterling's mind did the math without permission. 13 months since he left. 9 months for a human pregnancy. These twins looked 3 months old. Maybe 4. The timeline clicked into place like a lock turning. The light turned green. The car rolled forward. And Emerson disappeared into the crowd on the far sidewalk, taking with her the last thread of control Sterling had over the cold, clean life he had built. Courtney leaned closer. "What are you looking at?" Sterling's gaze stayed fixed on the place Emerson had been, as if his eyes could drag her back into view. "I have to make a call," he said. Courtney's mouth tightened. "Sterling, we're late for the tasting." He finally turned to look at her. Courtney's expression was composed concern threaded with irritation, the same look she wore whenever his life dared to become inconvenient. "I said," Sterling repeated, voice lower, "I have to make a call." He took out his phone with a steadiness he did not feel. His hand looked calm. His fingers moved like they had done 1,000 strategic moves. But inside, something ancient and locked was cracking. Because if those children were his, If his blood had found a way to create life, rare and dangerous as it was, then everything he had told himself was noble about leaving Emerson had been a lie. He had not protected her. He had abandoned her. He had walked away to protect himself from becoming his father, and in doing so he had become worse. That night, Sterling returned to his penthouse, a cathedral of marble and glass built to impress men who feared him and women who wanted power beside him. The floors were white stone that never warmed. The windows rose like walls to the sky. Blackout shades were programmed to drop before dawn. The art on the walls had been chosen by an interior designer who believed timeless meant bloodless. Courtney fit perfectly inside it. She stood by the window now, her reflection sharp against the city lights, speaking about guest lists and council seating as if love was a chessboard. Your father would have wanted the Montlairs at the head table, she said. There it was again, his father's ghost used as a leash. Sterling's grip tightened around a glass of dark liquor he could not taste. His father had been dead 60 years, yet still ruled Sterling's life from the grave. Everything Sterling did was weighed against the same question. What would father expect? Control. Restraint. Duty above all else. His father had ruled for centuries without letting emotion crack his face. He had married for bloodline, kept affection at arm's length, raised Sterling with distant approval that always felt one mistake away from disappointment. Sterling had spent his existence trying to be that untouchable. And he had succeeded. He looked around the penthouse. This perfectly curated mausoleum. This monument to a king who did not allow himself warmth. And all Sterling could see was Emerson's tired face and two tiny infants pressed against her chest. His children growing up somewhere without him, while he stood here choosing centerpieces with a woman who didn't know his favorite color. Courtney kept talking. We should do the engagement announcement on the council network first. It will. Sterling set down the glass. Courtney, he said. She smiled politely. Yes. We're postponing. Her smile froze. Postponing what? Everything. Silence dropped like a curtain. Courtney's eyes sharpened. Sterling, what is this? Sterling's voice stayed controlled because it was the only thing he had left. A matter of personal consequence. Courtney stepped closer, her heels quiet on marble. The council will not accept indecision. You know what they expect. You know what your father would. Sterling's gaze lifted, and the room seemed to chill around it. Do not speak of my father. Courtney stopped. For the first time in their arrangement, she looked uncertain. Sterling turned away and walked to his office without another word. Behind him, Courtney's voice turned hard. You're making a mistake. Sterling didn't answer because he had already lived the mistake, 13 months ago, when he walked away from a small apartment and a woman who loved him with both hands open. He closed the door and for a moment, allowed himself to feel the weight of what he had seen. Then he made the call he had avoided making for over a year. The private investigator who worked in shadows answered on the first ring. Sterling didn't waste breath on pleasantries. I need an address, Sterling said. Emerson Becker. Current residence. No alerts. No trace. There was a pause, just long enough for respect to register through the line. Understood, the investigator said. I'll send it. Sterling stared at the dark city outside his window as the call ended. In the glass, he saw his own reflection. A king with a perfect jawline, perfect posture, perfect coldness. A monster made elegant. He told himself he would confirm paternity. He told himself he would make a plan. He told himself he would do this the right way. But the truth was simpler. He needed to see them again. He needed to see her again. At 2:07 a.m., the text arrived with a street number in Queens. Not wealthy. Not dangerous. Ordinary. The kind of place where people worked 2 jobs and parked too close to fire hydrants. The kind of place where no one cared that a vampire king existed, because the rent was due whether monsters were real or not. Sterling stood across the street before dawn, hoodie pulled low, hands in pockets, watching the second-floor window of a converted brownstone. The lights were off. Emerson was asleep, or trying to sleep if the twins allowed it. Sterling told himself he would knock at sunset and speak like a king. But he stayed frozen across the street like a coward, because courage was easy against enemies and terrifying against the person you had wronged. The sun threatened the horizon, and Sterling retreated to his car before daylight could burn his skin. He sat behind tinted glass while the world brightened, feeling the strange helplessness of being forced to wait. Just after 9, Emerson emerged. Sterling's chest tightened again. She looked like someone who had been holding her breath for months. Her hair was pulled into a messy knot. She wore a worn jacket and jeans with a rip at the knee. Her hands were full, because her life allowed no empty space. A double stroller caught on the threshold of the building. Emerson adjusted the angle, tried again, and one baby started crying. She murmured something soft and steady, rocking the stroller with her hip while wrestling it over the lip of the doorway. No one stopped to help. A man walked past with headphones on. A woman glanced once and looked away. A delivery cyclist nearly clipped her and shouted something rude without slowing. Emerson didn't react. She simply endured. Sterling watched as she balanced 2 grocery bags on one arm while pushing the stroller with the other. Her shoulders were tight. Her jaw set. She had carried this weight alone while he sat and marbled, deciding what color the tablecloths should be. Something inside Sterling shifted, not rage, not jealousy, but a kind of shame so sharp it felt like sunlight in his chest. Emerson stopped at the corner for the walk signal. One twin fussed louder. Emerson leaned down, found a pacifier in the diaper bag, and eased it into the baby's mouth without missing a beat. The crying stopped. Emerson exhaled. Sterling realized then that he had told himself a story to justify leaving. He had convinced himself he was protecting her from the darkness of his world. He had convinced himself he would poison her happiness. He had convinced himself love would turn into duty, and warmth into disappointment, because that was what his father had taught him love became. But Emerson hadn't needed protection from him. She had needed him. And he had abandoned her because he was afraid to risk becoming a better man. At sunset, Sterling did not wait for courage to arrive. He chose a simple black coat, nothing royal, no crest, no ring. He left his guards behind. He left his title behind. He drove alone into Queens with the kind of fear he hadn't felt since he was a boy, forced to stand before his father's throne and prove he deserved to exist. He climbed the steps of the converted brownstone as the streetlights flickered on. And he knocked. The door opened a few inches. Emerson stood there in gray sweatpants and an oversized sweater, holding a baby monitor in one hand. The hallway light painted her face softly, and for a moment Sterling saw the woman he used to know, before exhaustion carved new lines into her. Her expression didn't change. No shock. No fury. Only recognition. Like she had expected this eventually. "Sterling," she said quietly. Not a question. Just his name. His voice came out rough. "Emerson." She glanced behind her into the apartment. "They're asleep. So if you're here to cause a scene, you need to leave." "I'm not here to cause a scene." "Then why are you here?" Her voice was calm, but calm like ice on deep water. Sterling had rehearsed speeches. Apologies. Explanations balanced between authority and humility. But the sight of her, real, close, living a life he had abandoned, burned the words away. Emerson studied him for a long moment. Then she stepped back and opened the door wider. "5 minutes," she said. Sterling stepped inside. The apartment was small. A narrow kitchen visible from the entryway, a living room barely big enough for a couch, and a coffee table covered in folded laundry, burp cloths, and bills. 2 bassinets sat against the far wall beside soft nightlights. The air smelled like baby powder and lavender and something warm Sterling couldn't name. It smelled like home. Emerson set the baby monitor on the counter and leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. Waiting. Sterling forced himself to meet her eyes. "I saw you 2 days ago. On 5th. Emerson's gaze did not flicker. "I know. You knew I saw you? I saw your car." Her voice sharpened. Tinted windows. Personalized plates. Kind of hard to miss. "And you didn't?" Sterling stopped, realizing how foolish the question was. Emerson's eyes held his without mercy. "What was I supposed to do?" "Wave." Sterling swallowed. He stepped forward, careful, like one wrong move would shatter the fragile truce of the doorway. "Are they mine?" he asked. For a second, Sterling thought she might slam the door in his face. Instead, Emerson turned away without a word and walked to a small bookshelf. She pulled down a manila folder and returned, holding it out. Sterling took it. Inside were medical records, hospital paperwork, and 2 birth certificates. 2 names. Elliot Becker. Isla Becker. Father, unknown. Sterling stared at the blank line where his name should have been until the words blurred. He lifted his eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" Emerson's voice stayed steady. "You made it very clear you didn't want this life." Sterling flinched. "You said you couldn't be what I needed," she continued, each sentence placed with careful precision. "You said staying would hurt me more than leaving. So I let you go where you said you wanted to be." "I didn't know you were pregnant," Sterling said, and the truth sounded pathetic in his own mouth. "I didn't either," Emerson replied. "Not until 2 weeks after you left." Silence filled the apartment. Sterling felt it like pressure in his bones. "And by then," Emerson said, quieter now, "you had already made your choice." "I would have come back," Sterling said automatically. Emerson's eyes narrowed. "Out of obligation?" Sterling couldn't answer. Emerson shook her head once. I didn't want that. They don't deserve that. Sterling looked down at the certificates again, at the proof that his blood existed in the world without him. I didn't hide them, Emerson said, softer but no less firm. I just didn't chase you. One of the babies stirred in the bassinet with a tiny whimper. Emerson moved instantly, crossing the room and lifting a small bundle with practiced hands. She swayed gently, murmuring low and soothing until the whimper faded. Sterling watched, frozen in place as Emerson calmed a life he had never earned the right to touch. You should go, Emerson said without looking at him. You got your answer. Sterling didn't move. Because for the first time in 13 months, he wasn't sure leaving was the answer to anything. Emerson lowered the baby back into the bassinet and tucked the blanket around her with a tenderness that made Sterling's chest ache. Then she glanced at the second bassinet as the other twin began to squirm. Emerson looked at Sterling. Then, with a tired exhale that sounded like surrender and defiance at once, she said, If you're going to stand there, make yourself useful. Sterling's body went still. Emerson nodded toward the second bassinet. Elliot's fussier. He settles if you hold him. Sterling took a step forward like he was walking toward an altar, not a baby. His voice broke. I don't know how. Don't overthink it, Emerson said. Support the head. Sterling reached into the bassinet with hands that had ended wars, signed treaties, passed death sentences without flinching. He slid one hand under Elliot's head and the other under the tiny back. He lifted. Elliot's eyes opened. Silver blue. Clear and bright and unmistakable. Hardcore eyes. Sterling's chest cracked open with something ancient and sharp and alive. The baby stared up at him with calm curiosity, as if this was exactly where he belonged. Sterling whispered, barely audible, Hello. Elliot made a small sound and curled his fingers against Sterling's coat, gripping like a promise. Sterling had built his entire existence around control. But in that moment, holding his son, control left him completely. Emerson stepped closer and adjusted Sterling's arm gently, shifting the baby into a more natural position against Sterling's chest. Her fingers brushed his sleeve. She pulled back quickly like touch was dangerous. The apartment was too quiet. The night light glowed softly. The baby breathed. And Sterling realized something terrifying. This warmth, was what he had run from. Emerson's voice came out softer than before. He looks like you. Sterling stared down at Elliot, at the tiny face, the impossible eyes, the fragile trust. I'm sorry, Sterling said, and for the first time in a century the words weren't political. They were human. Emerson's expression didn't forgive him. But it didn't harden either. For what? She asked. For leaving, Sterling said. For convincing myself it was noble. For letting you do this alone. Emerson swallowed, and for a second her calm trembled. You didn't let me do anything, Sterling. I chose this. You shouldn't have had to, Sterling said. Emerson looked at him then, really looked, and in her eyes Sterling saw the truth. She was strong. But she was tired. And she had needed him. Elliot's tiny hand flexed against Sterling's chest, right over where a heartbeat should have been. Sterling held his son and looked at Emerson with a vow forming in the silence. He would not leave again. Not this time. Not ever. The fiancé and the lie. Sterling did not leave that night. He told himself he would, after 5 minutes, after answers, after proof. But time lost its authority inside Emerson's small apartment, where the walls were thin, the light was warm, and the future breathed softly in 2 bassinets. Elliot slept against Sterling's chest as if he had always belonged there. Sterling stood frozen, afraid that if he moved, the fragile piece would shatter. His body, normally cold and perfectly still, felt wrong, too tense, too aware. He adjusted his grip slightly, supporting Elliot's head the way Emerson had shown him. The baby stirred once, then settled, fingers still curled in Sterling's coat like a claim. Emerson watched him from the kitchen doorway. She did not smile. She did not soften. But she did not tell him to put the baby down either. You should sit, she said finally. Not gently. Not cruelly. Simply practical. Sterling obeyed. He lowered himself onto the edge of the couch, movements slow and deliberate, as if the world might crack if he acted like a king instead of a man. Elliot sighed in his sleep, warm and impossibly alive. Sterling felt it then, the weight. Not physical but moral. A responsibility that did not come with guards or crowns. Emerson crossed the room and lifted Isla from her bassinet with practiced ease. The baby barely stirred, cheek resting against Emerson's collarbone. The sight struck Sterling harder than any accusation could have. You're good at this, Sterling said quietly. Emerson didn't look at him. I had to be. Silence settled again, thicker this time. Sterling searched for words that didn't sound like excuses. I didn't come here to disrupt your life. Emerson finally met his eyes. Then why did you come? Because I was wrong, he said. And because those children deserve more than silence. Emerson's jaw tightened. Silence was easier than false promises. Sterling accepted the blow without flinching. I won't make promises I can't keep. That was your problem before, Emerson replied. You decided what you couldn't keep without asking me what I needed. The truth of it settled heavily between them. From the bassinet, Isla made a small sound. Emerson swayed instinctively, rocking her with gentle precision. Sterling watched the motion, memorizing it, not as a tactic, not as strategy, but as something sacred. I won't stay if you don't want me to, Sterling said. But I won't disappear again. Emerson studied him, exhaustion lining her eyes like old ink. You don't get to decide that either. Sterling nodded. Then tell me what you want. Emerson hesitated. It was the smallest pause, but Sterling felt it like a held breath. I want, she said slowly, stability. For them. No secrets. No disappearances. No sudden decisions made in rooms I'm not allowed into. You would be allowed everywhere, Sterling said without thinking. Emerson's mouth curved slightly, not a smile but recognition. That world doesn't work that way. Sterling looked down at Elliot, then back at Emerson. Then I will change how it works. The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of centuries. Sterling left just before dawn. Not because Emerson told him to go, but because daylight was a boundary even kings respected. He placed Elliot gently back into the bassinet with hands that no longer shook. Emerson watched every movement, measuring sincerity not by words but by care. At the door Sterling paused. I'll come back tonight, he said. If you allow it. Emerson held Isla close and nodded once. We'll see. It was not forgiveness. But it was not rejection. Sterling walked into the fading night with a strange, unfamiliar ache in his chest, something close to hope and far more dangerous. The next evening Sterling returned without ceremony. No armored car. No guards in shadows. Just a man carrying a box of diapers he'd clearly bought in the wrong size and a bag of groceries that suggested he had read ingredient labels for the first time in his life. Emerson opened the door and raised an eyebrow. Sterling held up the bag. I may have misjudged portions. Emerson took it, glanced inside, and shook her head faintly. You bought organic baby food imported from 3 countries. I panicked, Sterling admitted. That earned him the smallest, briefest huff of laughter, gone as soon as it appeared, but real enough to matter. He stayed. He learned. He warmed bottles too slowly. He rocked Elliot too stiffly. Isla cried less for him, which Emerson explained meant she didn't trust him yet. Sterling accepted that too. Night after night he came back. Not as a ruler. Not as a savior. Just present. And presence, Sterling learned, was harder than power. Across the city, Courtney waited. She stood in Sterling's penthouse with the confidence of a woman who believed absence was a temporary malfunction, not a decision. Her phone lay untouched on the marble counter as she stared at the city beyond the glass. This was not how things went. Sterling did not miss meetings. Sterling did not vanish without explanation. Sterling did not ignore calls. The elevator chimed. Sterling stepped out, coat unbuttoned, expression unreadable. Courtney turned sharply. There you are. Sterling removed his coat carefully. We need to talk. Courtney crossed her arms. You disappeared for 2 nights. The council is asking questions. I'm sure they are. Courtney's eyes narrowed. This isn't funny. No, Sterling said calmly. It isn't. She stepped closer. Whatever distraction this is, it ends now. The announcement is scheduled. Your absence suggests instability. Sterling met her gaze without flinching. Then let them see it. Courtney froze. What? I am not marrying you, Sterling said. Not coldly. Not cruelly. Simply true. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Courtney laughed once, incredulous. You don't get to just cancel a dynasty. Sterling's eyes darkened, not with anger but resolve. I do. Courtney searched his face. There's someone else. Sterling did not answer. That was answer enough. Courtney's voice hardened. Is she human? Sterling's silence deepened. Courtney smiled then, but it was not kind. You've lost your mind. No, Sterling replied. I found it. Courtney stepped back, recalculating. The council will never allow it. Then the council will adapt. Her smile vanished. You would risk civil fracture for a woman? Sterling thought of Emerson's tired eyes. Of Elliot's grip. Of Isla's quiet trust. I would risk everything, he said, for my children. Courtney went still. Children? She repeated. Sterling's gaze sharpened. You will not go near them. Courtney's composure cracked for the first time. You hid this from me? You were never meant to know, Sterling said. Courtney straightened, anger replacing disbelief. Then you underestimate me. 2 days later, Emerson felt it. Not danger, not yet, but pressure. Her landlord mentioned policy changes. The daycare waitlist she'd been promised suddenly closed. A woman at the grocery store stared too long, then whispered into her phone. Sterling noticed immediately. You're being watched, he said quietly one evening as they stood in the kitchen, Elliot asleep against his shoulder. Emerson stiffened. By who? People who fear change, Sterling replied. And people who believe power entitles them to take. Emerson turned to him. Is this because of you? Yes, Sterling said. And I won't pretend otherwise. She absorbed that jaw set. I won't let them touch my children. They won't, Sterling said. Emerson studied his face. That sounds like a threat. Sterling shook his head. It's a promise. That night, the council summoned him. The message was formal. Unavoidable. Ancient. Sterling stood in the chamber beneath the city, a ring of stone older than governments, lit by low crimson light. The elders watched him with eyes that had seen empires burn. You are destabilizing the balance, one said. You have broken an engagement, said another. And concealed assets, murmured a third. Sterling's voice echoed steady and unbowed. My children are not assets. A ripple moved through the chamber. Children? An elder repeated slowly. Twins? Sterling said. Pause. Then one elder leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Twins are improbable. They exist, Sterling replied. Then they must be registered, the elder said. Assessed. Sterling's hands curled into fists. They are human infants. They are hard-court blood, the elder countered. Which makes them counsel concern. Sterling's voice dropped. They are under my protection. The chamber fell silent. At last the eldest spoke. Bring them to us. Sterling lifted his chin. No. Gasps rippled. The elder's gaze hardened. Then you challenge the council. Sterling did not hesitate. I choose my family. When Sterling returned to Emerson's apartment that night, his expression was grave. Emerson took one look at him and knew. What did they say? She asked. Sterling knelt in front of her, lowering himself to her level, not as a king but as a man asking permission. They want the twins, he said. Emerson's arms tightened around Isla. Over my dead body. Sterling met her eyes. That will not be necessary. She searched his face for deception and found none. They will not take them, Sterling continued. Not from you. Not from me. Emerson swallowed. This world of yours, it's dangerous. Yes, Sterling said honestly. Which is why I won't let it touch you without me standing in front of it. For the first time, Emerson did not pull away. She didn't lean in either. But she stayed. The queen who refused to bow. The first public humiliation came quietly. It always did. Not with shouting or violence, but with paperwork, polite smiles, and doors that closed just a little too fast. Emerson felt it when the daycare coordinator stopped returning her calls. When the hospital billing department suddenly lost her assistant's paperwork. When her landlord emailed to say the building was being reconsidered for renovation, and her lease might not be renewed. None of it screamed danger. But all of it whispered the same message. You don't belong. Sterling noticed the tension in her shoulders before she ever said a word. You're holding your breath, he said one evening as Emerson bounced Isla gently while Elliot slept in his carrier. I'm fine, Emerson replied automatically. Sterling didn't argue. He simply reached into his coat pocket and placed his phone on the table, screen glowing with an open email. Emerson read it once. Then again. Her stomach dropped. They're raising my rent, she said slowly. By 40%. Effective next month. Sterling's jaw tightened. They can't do that, she added quickly, fear flashing through her calm. I've never been late. I've never complained. They can, Sterling said quietly. If they're encouraged. Emerson looked at him sharply. By who? Sterling didn't answer right away. That was answer enough. The breaking point came at the pediatric clinic. Emerson sat in the waiting room with the twins, diaper bag at her feet, exhaustion etched into every movement. Sterling had offered to come, but she'd insisted she could handle a simple checkup on her own. She wanted to prove, to herself most of all, that she wasn't fragile. The receptionist barely looked up when Emerson approached. Name? The woman asked. Becker. Emerson. Twins. The receptionist typed, frowned, then typed again. I don't see you. I have an appointment, Emerson said calmly. 10 a.m. The receptionist sighed loudly as if inconvenienced by Emerson's existence. Insurance. Emerson slid the card across the counter. The woman's eyes flicked over it, then hardened. This coverage doesn't apply here anymore. That's not possible, Emerson replied. I was here last month. Policies change, the receptionist said flatly, already turning away. One of the twins began to cry. Emerson shifted the carrier, keeping her voice steady. Could you please check again? The receptionist finally looked at her fully. Looked at the worn sweater. The tired eyes. The stroller wheels scuffed from city sidewalks. This clinic prioritizes certain patients, she said. The words weren't loud, but they were sharp. Emerson felt heat rise in her chest, not anger but something older and heavier. Shame tried to creep in, the familiar voice that told her not to make trouble. She straightened. I'm not asking for priority, Emerson said. I'm asking for medical care for my children. The receptionist leaned back. Then you'll need to reschedule somewhere else. A man in an expensive coat behind Emerson cleared his throat impatiently. Some of us have places to be, he muttered. Emerson closed her eyes for half a second. Then she turned. Then go, she said quietly. Because my children are staying. The room fell silent. The receptionist scoffed. Security. Stop. The voice cut through the room like steel wrapped in silk. Sterling stood in the doorway. He hadn't meant to come. He had sensed something, an unease he'd learned to trust long ago, and followed it. Now he took in the scene with a single glance. The crying child. The stiff receptionist. The whispering patients. And Emerson, standing perfectly still, refusing to bow. Sterling walked forward slowly. Every step carried weight. The air seemed to change around him, pressure settling in the room like an approaching storm. Conversations died. Phones lowered. People shifted without knowing why. Sterling stopped beside Emerson. He did not touch her. He did not raise his voice. This clinic, he said calmly, receives funding from the Harcourt Foundation. The receptionist blinked. What? Sterling turned his gaze to her fully. Which means, he continued, your employment is conditional upon compliance with its charter. The woman swallowed. Sir, I'm just following. Policies, Sterling finished. Yes. I'm familiar with how that excuse works. He glanced at the computer screen. You removed her appointment manually. You flagged her insurance incorrectly. I didn't. And you attempted to deny care to infants. The receptionist's face drained of color. Sterling leaned in slightly. Not threatening. Not loud. Correct this, he said, or find new work by the end of the day. The man behind Emerson took a step back. The receptionist's hands shook as she typed. Of course. I'm sorry. There was an error. Sterling didn't smile. He turned to Emerson. I apologize for the delay. Emerson met his eyes. Something changed then. Not gratitude. Not dependence. Recognition. Outside the clinic, Emerson stopped walking. Sterling paused beside her. I didn't ask you to do that, she said quietly. I know, Sterling replied. Her voice trembled, not with fear but with frustration. I don't want to be protected like I'm weak. Sterling turned to face her fully. You weren't protected because you're weak. Emerson crossed her arms. Then why? Because you were right, Sterling said simply. And someone tried to punish you for it. She stared at him. I won't erase your strength, he continued. But I won't let the world mistake kindness for permission to harm. Emerson exhaled slowly. For the first time she didn't argue. That night, Emerson found an envelope slipped beneath her door. No return address. Inside was a single document. A historical record. She read it once, then again, her pulse quickening. Sterling watched her from across the room. What is it? Emerson looked up. My grandmother's name is on this. Sterling's expression sharpened. That's impossible. She disappeared, Emerson said slowly. Everyone said she ran away. Sterling stepped closer. During the Ashfall conflict, he murmured. Human collaborators vanished. Emerson's hands trembled. She wasn't just human. Sterling's gaze flicked to the twins. The room seemed to hold its breath. That symbol, Emerson whispered, pointing to a faded mark on the page. I've seen it before. Sterling knelt beside the bassinet. On Elliot's ankle, faint but unmistakable, was the same ancient sigil. A mark older than councils. Older than crowns. Sterling closed his eyes once. Emerson, he said carefully, this changes everything. She swallowed. What does it mean? Sterling met her gaze. It means, he said, you were never meant to bow. The council's trap. The summons arrived at dawn. Not by phone. Not by messenger. By blood. Sterling felt it before the sigil finished forming in the air above his desk, a pull deep in his bones, ancient and absolute. The Vampire Council did not request attendance. It claimed it. Emerson watched the symbol glow and fade, unease tightening her chest. They're calling you, she said. Sterling nodded once. Yes. Her voice stayed steady, but her fingers curled unconsciously around Isla's blanket. About the twins. Yes. Silence pressed in around them. Emerson lifted her chin. They don't get to decide what happens to my children. Sterling crossed the room and stopped in front of her, not towering, not distant. Present. They will try, he said. Which is why you're coming with me. Emerson blinked. Absolutely not. Sterling didn't flinch. They expect fear. Absence. Compliance. They will get none of those. She searched his face. That place, it's not meant for people like me. Sterling's voice softened. It's exactly meant for people like you. They just forgot. The council chamber lay beneath the city like a buried cathedral. Stone older than memory curved overhead, etched with sigils that glowed faintly in crimson and silver. Pillars rose like petrified trees, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries of power passing through them. Emerson stepped inside with the twins secured against her chest. Every eye turned. Whispers rippled. Human. Unmarked. Then the whispers changed. Twins. Sterling walked beside her, his presence a shield, but Emerson did not hide behind it. She walked forward calmly, spine straight, gaze level. The elders sat in a ring, their forms varied, some beautiful, some monstrous, all ancient. Courtney stood among the observers, dressed in blood-red silk, her smile thin and sharp. Sterling felt her satisfaction like a blade at his back. The eldest elder spoke. You arrive, accompanied. Sterling's voice echoed evenly. I arrive whole. The elder's gaze slid to Emerson. Human, he said as if tasting the word. You were not summoned. Emerson answered before Sterling could. Neither were my children. A murmur swept the chamber. Courtney's smile faltered. The elder's eyes narrowed. You stand before powers that have ruled longer than your species has named fire. Emerson did not raise her voice. And yet you're speaking to me. Sterling felt it then, the shift. Not rebellion. Recognition. The eldest leaned back slightly. These children carry forbidden blood. They carry love, Emerson replied. And responsibility. Courtney stepped forward. This is dangerous sentimentality, she said. Those twins destabilize bloodline order. Sterling turned slowly. You no longer speak for me. Courtney's eyes flashed. You're throwing away centuries of stability. Sterling looked at her calmly. Stability built on cruelty deserves to fall. Courtney laughed softly. You think she belongs here? She's human. Weak. Temporary. Emerson met Courtney's gaze. I survived you, Emerson said quietly. And I didn't even know you existed. The chamber went still. An elder leaned forward. Explain the mark. Sterling inhaled. The sigil predates the council. It appears only when balance is threatened and restored. Murmurs grew louder. Courtney's voice sharpened. That's a myth. Emerson adjusted Isla gently. My grandmother wore it. The elder's eyes widened. The Ashfall survivor? Emerson nodded. She fled so your war wouldn't consume another generation. Silence crashed through the chamber like thunder. Sterling stepped forward. You erased her history. You erased her descendants. And still fate returned. The eldest elder closed his eyes briefly. Then this was inevitable. Courtney's composure shattered. You can't let her decide our future. Sterling turned to Emerson. And then he knelt. Gasps echoed. A vampire king kneeling before a human woman. Sterling's voice carried, clear and unshaking. I ask you, he said, to stand with me. Not behind me. Emerson's breath caught. Slowly she nodded. She stepped forward, not elevated, not crowned. Simply unbroken. The eldest elder spoke again, voice heavy. Then the council will judge. Emerson lifted her chin. So will history. Courtney took a step back, fear finally bleeding through her fury. Because the trap had failed. The council had expected a frightened woman. They had found a queen who refused to bow. The crosswalk in reverse. The council did not adjourn in peace. It never did. Power rarely surrendered quietly, and ancient power least of all. As Emerson stood beside Sterling in the stone chamber, the air shifted, not with violence but calculation. The elders whispered among themselves in a language older than cities, their voices threading together like roots beneath the earth. Courtney remained frozen near the outer ring, her hands clenched at her sides, her mind racing faster than her control could contain. This was not how it was supposed to go. The twins were meant to be leverage. Emerson was meant to be afraid. Sterling was meant to choose duty. Instead, the chamber held a woman who refused to bow and a king who had knelt by choice. The eldest elder lifted his hand. "The council will deliberate," he said. "Until then, the children remain under observation." Emerson's body tensed instantly. Sterling stepped forward. "They leave with me." The elder's gaze sharpened. "You overreach." Sterling's voice was calm, but the stone beneath their feet seemed to listen. "I draw a boundary." Courtney laughed sharply. "You're threatening civil fracture." Sterling turned to her slowly. "You already caused it." Courtney's smile faltered. "I protected the council from chaos." "You manufactured chaos," Emerson said quietly. Courtney's eyes snapped to her. "You don't belong in this conversation." Emerson met her gaze evenly. "Neither do lies." The eldest elder raised his hand again. "Enough." Then his eyes drifted to Courtney. "You initiated unauthorized inquiries, pressured human institutions, leveraged influence without sanction." Courtney stiffened. "I did what was necessary." "You did what benefited you," the elder corrected. Murmurs rose, sharper now, edged with disapproval. Courtney took a step back. "You're choosing her over stability." Sterling answered without hesitation. "No. I'm choosing truth over convenience." The elder's voice dropped. "Courtney of House Vermont, you are stripped of council favor pending inquiry." The words hit like a blade. Courtney's breath caught. "You can't." "You already did," the elder said. Instant karma rarely arrived with spectacle. It arrived with consequences. Courtney was escorted from the chamber, her power unraveling not with screams but silence. Emerson watched, heart pounding, not with triumph but clarity. Justice did not need cruelty. It needed courage. The backlash came swiftly. Not through violence but exposure. Sterling anticipated it. By the next night, a coordinated attempt was made to discredit Emerson. Anonymous tips, falsified records, rumors whispered into the right ears. But for every lie released, Sterling released truth. Legal documents, financial trails, recorded directives. Courtney's schemes collapsed under their own weight. Landlords reversed decisions. Clinics issued formal apologies. Daycare slots reopened. The pressure vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. Emerson felt the shift not in announcements but in breath. In the way her shoulders finally lowered. In the way the city seemed to make room for her again. For the first time since the twins were born, she slept through the night. Weeks passed. The world did not end. The council adapted. And Sterling changed the rules. He established new protections, clear, binding, irreversible, for human families touched by vampire affairs. No coercion. No erasure. No quiet solutions. It angered some. Inspired others. Sterling did not care. Because every night, he returned to a small apartment where 2 infants waited for him. He learned lullabies. He learned patience. He learned how to warm bottles properly. And Emerson watched, not with suspicion now but with something cautious and real. One evening as the twins slept, Emerson stood by the window, city lights reflecting softly in the glass. Sterling joined her, leaving a respectful space between them. "You don't have to stay," Emerson said quietly. "You've done enough." Sterling shook his head. "I'm not here because of obligation." She turned to him. "Then why?" Sterling met her eyes. "Because I love them. And because I love you." The words were not dramatic. They were honest. Emerson inhaled slowly. "Love isn't a throne." "I know," Sterling said. "That's why I choose it." She studied him for a long moment, searching for the man who had once left without looking back. She found someone else. Someone who stayed. Emerson stepped closer. Not into his arms. Just close enough. "We'll move slowly," she said. Sterling nodded. "As slow as you need." She reached out and placed her hand over his chest, where a heartbeat should have been. "I don't need a king," she said. Sterling covered her hand with his own. "Good." Months later, the crosswalk appeared again. The same street. The same intersection. But everything else had changed. Emerson stood at the curb with the twins in their stroller, bundled against the cold. Sterling stood beside her, not behind tinted glass, not separated by fear. The light turned red. They waited. People passed them without knowing they stood beside a king. And that was exactly how Sterling wanted it. The light turned green. They stepped forward together. No rushing. No hiding. Just forward. As they crossed, Elliot laughed. A soft, bright sound that turned Emerson's head and made Sterling smile without restraint. On the other side, Emerson stopped. She looked at Sterling, really looked at him. "You didn't save me," she said. Sterling nodded. I know. You stood with me. Yes. She smiled then, not cautious, not tired. Free.